120 chemicals in care products, cream, shampoos used every day by women, most of them untested, and a lot by men as well.
The average woman applies 12 beauty products to her body every day. 120 chemicals. For men, it's 6 cosmetics and 80 chemicals. From formaldehyde, a known carcinogen, and dioxane in some shampoos, to lead on your lips, parabens possibly linked to cancer and deodorant, even mercury in skin lightening creams, toluene known to cause headaches in nail polish, and diethyl phthalate linked to allergies, hormone disruption, and dermatitis in perfume.
In a nationwide study just released of chemical fire retardants by the Environmental Working Group found that children 1 to 4 have 3 times the level of fire retardant chemicals in their system than their parents do.
19 out of the 20 children they tested had elevated levels of these PBDEs, much higher than their parents. Now, there had been an assumption for quite a while that if the parents' level was high, the child's level was probably similar. This new study shows us that, in fact, they're sometimes 3 times higher.
These fire retardant chemicals can be found all over the home, not only in young children's pajamas, but in sofas, chairs, and other upholstery.
Well, what can you do? What kinds of things can you avoid that will help lower your exposure to these 700 things that are in our bodies? We've got things like volatile organic chemicals that are found in a lot of the things that we're exposed to.
Like air freshener and carpet cleaners and
paints, you know. Yeah. In our office, we make sure, in our home, we make sure we have low VOC paints because these volatile organic chemicals are definitely toxic. Right. You can avoid things that have BPA in them, all the plastics, the flexible plastics that are a problem, and keep those from being in your system.
When plastics come out, it was one of the best inventions ever. But then there's this other side of it where you really don't know that you're touching BPA through your everyday life, and it's shocking.
But just so you know, BPA is not in every plastic, and it's typically not found in children's toys.
The only way to protect yourself against that is to increase the ability of your own internal immune system to handle this problem. You see, we are built with the most fantastic defense system ever devised, and that's our own human immune system. Unfortunately, it is depressed many times due to poor nutrition, toxins in the environment, and various other issues. We do this by detoxification, as we mentioned earlier, both at the systemic and the cellular level. We also have developed a very effective and natural immune support system.
Public health experts are only beginning to understand what harm, if any, low-level chemical exposure can cause. Dr. Leo Trasande worries most about children.
We're currently in an epidemic of chronic disease among American children. Rates of asthma, childhood cancers, birth defects, and developmental disabilities are all on the rise, and increasingly are being attributed to chemicals that we're all exposed to on a day-to-day basis.
Toxic chemicals in the environment are killing people. Scolding regulators for taking a reactionary rather than a precautionary approach, the panel, which is attached to the National Institutes of Health, noted that only a few hundred of the 80,000 chemicals used in the United States have been tested for safety. The panel found that children are particularly vulnerable because they are smaller and are developing faster than adults. The report notes unexplained rising rates of some cancers in children, and it points to recent studies that have found industrial chemicals in umbilical cord blood, which supplies nutrients to fetuses.
We're exposed to hundreds of chemicals in the course of a day. They absorb through our skin, say when we use lotions or other, shampoos, conditioners, deodorants. We breathe them in. We breathe in contaminants for indoor air. We breathe in automobile pollution when we're commuting to work. We eat trace contaminants in our foods. We eat food packaging chemicals, persistent pesticides. So just the act of living now involves exposures to hundreds of chemicals every day, and most of these chemicals didn't even exist 50 years ago. So this is a big experiment. What happens when you expose 300 million people to hundreds of chemicals daily? What does that mean for our health?
From the old-fashioned blow dryer to the newest straightening fad, women can get that silky smooth look a variety of ways. But a government agency recently released a hazard warning to salons across the country on certain keratin straightening solutions. So-called keratin treatments have recently come under fire because they contain formaldehyde. But the makers of Brazilian Blowout told NBC News the treatment does not exceed acceptable formaldehyde exposure levels. Still, this year, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, issued a hazard warning to salons about the potential risk of these products, saying some of their air tests showed levels higher than the accepted limits. Members of Congress have asked the FDA to start regulating these items.
Low-level, constant exposure to toxins has not been taken into consideration at all, nor what has happened when chemicals are combined. So what are the health risks? We are exposed to countless chemical ingredients in daily life, too numerous to outline here, but they fall mostly into three categories. They're the carcinogens, the endocrine disruptors, and the neurotoxins. Carcinogens cause cancer and promotes cancer's growth. Endocrine disruptors mimic human hormones in our bodies. Neurotoxins, on the other hand, alter your central nervous system, affecting brain activity, causing a range of problems from headaches to paralysis, seizures, loss of intellect, and simple bad moods. It's just so not good.
With 2/3 of Americans now overweight or obese, new research says there may be more to it than poor diet and not enough exercise. Hidden chemicals, the building blocks of everyday household items, may be wreaking havoc on our bodies. Called obesogens, they work by disrupting our hormonal systems, affecting fat cells and gene function. Obesogens include the now infamous BPA, phthalates, synthetic chemicals found in plastics, and PFOA, found in non-stick and stain-resistant products. And the list goes on and on. Plastic shower curtains, canned goods, cosmetics.
In PVC plastics, a lot of kids' toys, some household goods, building products, even pet toys.
Studies have shown 93% of Americans have detectable levels of BPA in their bodies, 75% phthalates.
Bisphenol A, BPA, is what is known as an endocrine disruptor. Studies have shown that in lab animals it causes breast and testicular cancer, diabetes, and hyperactivity. Its effects on humans are not entirely known. Endocrine disruptors were first identified as the cause of wildlife abnormalities in the early 90s. The Environmental Protection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration, though, repeatedly reassured the public that BPA, at least, was safe. The agencies cited studies done in the 1980s.
According to the Melamine Manufacturers Association that paid off the European Union, anyway, bisphenol A is now definitely linked to male infertility. It says earlier studies have linked it to a low sex drive, impotence, and DNA damage in sperm.
BPA, or bisphenol A, is thought to have caused all sorts of trouble for your system. Possible cancers, developmental problems, and early onset puberty have all been linked to the three-letter chemical, and most people are wise to stay away from it. Well, we know it can be found in plastics, receipts, dental sealants, even money. There might be an even more dangerous place that BPA is hiding: your kids' food. Researchers recently looked into canned foods that were specifically marketed to the children because BPA seems to wreak the most havoc on our younger ones. The study included Campbell's Disney Princess Soup and Annie's Homegrown Cheesy Ravioli and found relatively high levels of BPA in all of the tested cans. But for anything conclusive to come out, we need to understand exactly what level of BPA affects the human system, and we don't.
The BPA can trigger hormone-responsive gene changes in humans. An international research team collected blood and urine from 96 human male subjects. As urinary markers of BPA exposure rose, the likelihood that estrogen-responsive genes were activated in the blood also increased. And the doses of BPA that elicited these changes were about what the general population is exposed to in their daily use of products made with BPA. The authors of the study have concluded that BPA is active in humans and that it can be linked biologically to hormone signaling and related disorders in humans.
She now compares them to the chemical DECA, the one PBDE still produced in America.
I concluded that DECA was toxic.
Did you come away believing that these chemicals are capable of causing brain damage?
Yes, they absolutely are.
FR materials are inside mattresses. They form a barrier just under the cover or ticking. The CPSC says to the extent that FR chemical treatments remain bound to or within the mattress, exposure and its attendant risk would be minimized. But Mark Strobel is convinced it can get out as mattresses wear.
It's close chronic exposure. You're laying there with full body and breathing contact for your entire lives.
Others fear that what's considered safe now might not be down the road, such as lead in paint.
Chemicals are able to disrupt the early development of people. Babies come into the world already carrying a burden of chemical exposure from day one that they got from their mothers.
The Toy Industry Association says there is no need for concern. Stacy Leisner is the association's spokesperson.
We have very strict regulations for all toys that are sold in the U.S., regardless of where they are from, and we're confident, again, that toys on the shelves now are safer than ever before.
34 years have passed since the United States first regulated the use of toxic substances. Since then, more than 80,000 chemicals have entered the market without testing or regulation. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has been able to regulate only 5.
One of the biggest threats to our health is our own environment. Some toxins are easy to spot. However, most are either invisible or undetectable to the average person.
We have poisoned our water, we have poisoned our air, we are poisoning our foods, and we're doing that to allow industry to advance. But in the process, we're introducing hundreds and hundreds of pollutants into our bodies.
In particular, I worry about pesticides, herbicides on the fruit and vegetables you eat. And on the animal side, very concerned about growth hormone, steroids, antibiotics being injected into the food supply.
Prescription drugs that are now showing up in the water supplies, about arsenic that's showing up in the water supplies, heavy metals.
We have sterilized our topsoil. The pesticides not only kill the living organisms that come to attack the farmer's produce, but it also hits the topsoil and it kills all the living microorganisms and bacteria that convert an inorganic rock mineral into an organic form for it to be absorbed and uptaken by the plant.
For us to assume that just because we have a plethora of food that we're not undernourished is really wrong, because our food, unfortunately, is undernourished.
We're developing a society because of all of these different toxins known to affect brain function. We're seeing a society that not only has a lot more people of lower IQ, but a lot fewer people of higher IQ. In other words, a dumbing down, a chemical dumbing down of society. So everyone's sort of mediocre. That leaves them dependent on government because they can't excel. We have these people of lower IQ who are totally dependent. Then we have this mass of people who are going to believe anything they're told because they can't really think clearly. And very few people of very high IQ who have good cognitive function who can figure this all out. And that's what they want.
This is a story about a world obsessed with stuff. It's a story about a system in crisis. We're trashing the planet, we're trashing each other, and we're not even having fun. The good thing is that when we start to understand the system, we start to see lots of places to step in and turn these problems into solutions. This lack of regulation leaves a huge hole that the cosmetics industry is all too happy to fill. They set up their own committee to self-police their products, and compliance with their recommendations is voluntary. So the cosmetics industry is making the rules and then deciding whether or not to follow them. So you see, it isn't our fault that these toxic products are in our bathrooms. It's a whole broken system that's ignoring the simple rule: toxics in, toxics out. On cosmetics labels, words like herbal, natural, even organic have no legal definition. That means that anybody can put anything in a bottle and call it natural. And they do. What's even nastier are hair relaxers marketed to 5-year-olds and skin whitening creams. These are super toxic, both in their ingredients and in the message they send about what beauty is.
What about all the other industrial pollutants like
PCBs. More than 12,000 food and feed samples tested across 18 countries. The highest mean contamination level was observed in fish and eggs. Fish and fish-derived products, followed by eggs, milk and their products, and then meat and meat products from land-based animals. The lowest contamination was observed in foods of plant origin. What is the impact of adopting a vegan diet on the concentrations of organochlorines in the blood? They found that vegans were significantly less polluted. Dioxins are toxic waste pollutants spewed out into the atmosphere that accumulate in the fatty tissues of humans and food animals consumed by humans. Using data from the EPA published last year, is there more toxic waste in beef, cheese, chicken, eggs, fish, lamb, or pork? It's fish, and indeed that was by far the worst. But what's second worst? Eggs, with cheese the runner-up. Because so many drugs are excreted in our urine, when we pee them down the toilet, they can end up polluting our rivers and streams and the flesh of the fish swimming in them. In fish fillets, they found Benadryl, Cardizem, Tegretol, Lopid, Zoloft, and Prozac metabolites. The levels they found were really low, but what if these compounds bioaccumulate in tissue, or have unintended consequences from the complex mixtures of contaminants we're exposed to? But which is worse, fish, seal, or shark oil capsule? Well, for PCBs, here's how much is in fish oil. But seals eat fish, and sharks eat seals. And then if we eat sharks or shark products, that puts us precipitously at the top of the food chain. What about pesticides, like DDT, which, though banned decades ago after Silent Spring came out, still found in the food chain, and will be for another few centuries?